Today, we're going to dive into the microscopic and honestly pretty menacing world of Treponema. This is the spiral-shaped bacterium behind one of the most infamous diseases in all of human history. So just try to picture this. A tiny, living corkscrew. It's got this unique spiral motion that literally lets it drill its way through human tissue. Yeah, and its legacy, well, it's one of incredible fear and suffering. Let's get a closer look. All right, so let's get properly introduced. Who or what exactly is this corkscrew invader? Okay, so here's the textbook definition. Treponema is a genus of bacteria that are, you guessed it, spiral-shaped. But the single most important thing to remember about them is that distinctive corkscrew movement. It's not just a cool feature, it is absolutely central to how this thing causes disease. This right here is what makes Treponema so hard to pin down. For starters, it's incredibly thin. So thin, you can't just use a normal microscope. You need a special technique called dark field microscopy just to see it alive. And get this, its outer membrane doesn't have a compound called LPS, which is like a giant red flag that our immune system usually spots on bacteria. It's a key part of its disguise. And maybe most important of all, it's an obligate parasite. That means it can't survive out in the world on its own. It absolutely has to live inside a host, like us. And that brings us to the disease it's most famous for, syphilis. It was nicknamed the Great Imitator because its symptoms can look like so many other illnesses. The best way to understand it is to think of it like a 4-act play. So, the curtain rises, but in total silence. After the initial infection, for about 3 weeks on average, the bacterium is just quietly multiplying. The person has absolutely no idea it's even there. Act 1 is primary syphilis. You get a single sore called a chancre. The weird part? It's painless and it goes away by itself. You'd think you're in the clear, but the bacteria are just getting started. Weeks later, Act 2 begins, the secondary stage. The infection goes systemic, and you often see this rash break out all over the body. Then, things go quiet again. The disease enters a latent stage, disappearing from sight for years, sometimes even decades. But that final act, tertiary syphilis, that's the tragedy. This is where the infection can cause catastrophic damage to your heart, your brain, and other major organs. This really shows you how the infection explodes over time. You start with that primary stage chancre. It's just a single, localized ulcer. Highly infectious for sure, but it's in one spot. But by the secondary stage, you can get these widespread, moist, wart-like lesions called condyloma dilata. This is the visual proof that the infection isn't localized anymore. The bacterium has spread through the entire body. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. The story of Treponema is actually bigger than just syphilis. This bacterium is really part of a whole family that causes a few different, but related, diseases. Check this out. The same basic species, Treponema pallidum, has different subspecies that cause totally different diseases. So you have syphilis, which is sexually transmitted. But then you have yaws, spread by simple skin-to-skin contact, usually in kids. There's also beagel, which can be passed around on things like shared utensils, and it starts in the mouth. And then pinta, a different species, is also spread by skin contact, but only affects the skin. It's just a wild example of how tiny genetic tweaks can completely change how a pathogen behaves. So this leads to a huge question. How on earth does this bacterium manage to hang out in our bodies for so long, sometimes for an entire lifetime? Well, it's because it is an absolute master of disguise, fighting this invisible war against our immune system. Treponema has this brilliant 3-part survival strategy. First, it wears an invisibility cloak. Its outer membrane is super smooth with very few proteins that our immune cells can latch onto. Second, for the few proteins it does show, it's constantly changing them. It's like a spy who keeps switching disguises to avoid being caught. And third, it finds these incredible hideouts, places where our immune system has a tough time reaching, like our brain and our eyes. That's how it can stick around for decades. And this right here, this is probably the most critical thing to understand. The bacteria themselves, they don't release some powerful toxin that destroys your organs. The real devastation in late-stage syphilis, the damage to the heart, the brain, the bones, it comes from our own immune system's relentless, decades-long war against the invader. It's all collateral damage from a battle our body just can't seem to win. Okay, so you have this incredibly stealthy enemy. How do you find it, and how do you fight back? Let's talk about our modern lines of defense. Diagnosing this thing relies on 2 main kinds of blood tests. You can think of the non-treponemal tests as damage reports. They look for antibodies our body makes when its own tissues get damaged by the infection. The levels go down after treatment, so they're great for checking if the cure worked. The treponemal tests, on the other hand, are like an eyewitness ID. They look for antibodies against the bug itself. These usually stay positive for life, proving that a person was at some point definitely infected. And when it comes to actually fighting back, well, the answer has been the same for over 70 years, and it's incredibly effective. The silver bullet is penicillin. Even today, it is our #1 most effective weapon against treponema. It can cure the disease at any stage.
And that leaves us with one final, really puzzling question. We have a simple, effective cure for what can be a truly devastating disease. So why are we still fighting it? Why, in this age of incredible medical advancement, are cases of syphilis not only sticking around, but in some places, actually on the rise? Now that is something to think about.